The first bullet took the bottle lamp on the shelf and turned it into a splash of fire that hissed out in the dust. The second chewed a groove through the adobe by Caleb Rourke's ear and filled the one-room shack with the flat, mean thunder he knew from other years, other lives. He dropped without thinking, ribs slamming the packed earth floor, one hand already reaching for the pistol under the ticking mattress. Outside, horses screamed and men shouted over one another, their voices ragged with liquor and adrenaline. Caleb heard the scrape of boots, the jangle of tack, the way the sound carried hollow and thin in the desert night. His mind picked out distances and angles the way it always had, measuring cover, counting rifles. Old habits, he thought bitterly, die slower than men. The door shuddered in its frame as someone hit it with a shoulder. A third shot splintered the boards near the latch, and a fourth punched through the window shutter, sending shards of dirty glass skittering across the floor. Caleb rolled behind the narrow table, cursing under his breath. The table wouldn't stop a bullet. Neither would the thin walls, or the sorry excuse for a bed. This place was meant for sleeping and sewing up broken men, not for sieges. Caleb, a voice outside, too loud, too proud. You got my brother in there, you old crowd bait. Caleb's jaw clenched. He knew that voice. Wade Kincaid, Plains, lean and reckless. Youngest of the Kincaid brood that ran half the cattle and all the trouble in Silver Basin. Wade had swaggered into his makeshift clinic 2 months ago with a knife wound and too much charm, paid in dust, heavy coins, and empty promises. The Kincaids liked to forget they ever needed help. Ain't got anybody in here, Caleb called back. His voice came out rough, scraped from years of smoke and sand. Except me and a lot of empty shelves. You boys already shot my best lamp. Laughter answered him, mean and sharp. Another voice cut through it, steadier, older. Don't lie, Doc. We tracked his blood right to your door. That would be Silas Kincaid, Wade's older brother, all flint and calculation. Hand Levi over and maybe we let you keep breathing. Movement in the corner made Caleb glance over his shoulder. Boy on the pallet, barely 20, freckled, lips cracked with fever, tried to push himself up on one elbow. Levi Kincaid's bandaged chest showed a dark bloom in the lamplight that remained, a slow, spreading shadow where the bullet had gone and just left of his sternum. His eyes, steel gray like his brother's, found Caleb's and held them. Don't, Levi whispered. His voice was a rasp of air. Don't give me to M. Caleb felt an old, familiar anger stir under his ribs, the kind and thought he'd burned out of himself in the army hospitals back east. It was the anger that came when men kicked at the edges of his oath, when they forgot that a life under his hands belonged to him for as long as he could hold it. They're only after you 'cause you walked away from their stupidity, he muttered, crawling toward the pallet. He could hear the brothers outside fanning out, boots crunching in the loose stones, horses shifting. You shot a man in self-defense, and now they want to finish the job their own way. Levy's hand clutched weakly at his sleeve. There was fear in the boy's eyes, sure as sunrise, but something else too, something Caleb hadn't expected from a Kincaid. Shame. Wasn't just self-defense, Levi whispered. I drew first. Thought I had to prove something. Man had a family. Silas said I did right. But I seen his little girl run out after. Can't sleep without seeing her. The sounds outside shifted. The soft thunk of a boot against the back wall, someone testing how solid the adobe was. Heat crept through the cracked boards. Even at night, the Silver Basin desert kept the day's burn hidden in its bones. Caleb's shirt stuck to his back with sweat. He holstered his pistol, ignoring the way his fingers wanted to stay curled around the grip. Taking cover and trading shots with the Kincaids was a young man's game. And he was past 40 now, with a bad knee and too much scar tissue. There were 3, maybe 4 men outside. They'd brought rifles and pride. He had 1.6 gun and a conscience. "You listen to me," Caleb said, leaning over Levi. The boy's breath smelled faintly of blood and laudanum. "You're my patient. That means you're under my protection until you walk out of here or I cover your face with a sheet. I don't hand men over to hang from wagons or windmills. Not while they're still fighting for air." Levi tried to laugh, and it came out a wet, ugly sound. "You still think like an army doctor, huh?" "I still think like a man who's seen enough killing to last 3 lifetimes," Caleb replied. "Your brothers think justice is a rope and a tree. I think it's living long enough to feel what you've done." The door shuddered again. Wade's voice, closer now. "Last warning, Doc. We ain't leaving without him." "You keep him, you ride with us in hell." Caleb pushed himself up, his knee screaming protest, and limped to the door. He slid the bar loose, but didn't open it yet, setting his shoulder to the wood as if his weight would make any difference against bullets and fury. The night pressed on the other side, hot and black, and full of men who'd rather spill blood than face their own. He thought briefly of riding out of Silver Basin, of leaving the little shack with its tin roof, and crooked stove, and yellowed anatomy sketches. He drifted west after the war, trading the surgeon's tent for saloons and drifting card games, killing for coin when he was too drunk to remember his oath. It had taken him 10 years and 1 boy's death under his hands to crawl back toward the man he'd meant to be. This shack, with its threadbare cot and mismatched bottles, was all that stood between him and the man he'd once been. Mercy costs, he thought. Always has. Always will. He opened the door. 3 figures stood outlined in the lantern glow of the yard. Wade, lanky and wild-eyed, leaned on his Winchester like it was a dance partner. Beside him, Silas sat his horse, reins loose in one hand, the other resting near the butt of his revolver. A third Kincaid cousin, Milo, lurked near the rain barrel, a rifle cradled casual as a cat. Beyond them, the basin stretched under the moon like the bottom of a drained ocean. The town of Silver Basin was a cluster of dark shapes half a mile off. The overbuilt casino with its gaudy false front, the squat depot lit by railroad lanterns, the few shacks clinging to the tracks. Above it all, the black ridge of butcher's teeth cut the sky into jagged pieces. "Evenin', boys," Caleb said, as if they'd come for coffee and cards. "You're leaking lead into my walls. You're harboring a murderer." Silas replied, his voice flat. He had his father's jawline and his mother's bad temper, or so folks said, but tonight Caleb saw something harder etched there, a belief that the world bent to his will. "We just taken back what's ours." "Levi and a stray calf," Caleb said. "He's a man with a hole in his lung, and he's got a better chance of dying than living as it is. You drag him out, you might as well shoot him yourself." "Fine by me," Wade said, grinning. "He dragged us into this mess shooting that storekeep. Sheriff wants him. Railroad agent wants him. We give him up. He comes off us. That's just good sense, Doc." Caleb's fingers twitched at his side. Sheriff Porter did want Levi. So did the Pinkerton man who'd arrived on the afternoon train 2 days back, all slick mustache and Eastern vowels. The storekeeper Levi had got, shot during a drunken altercation, had been a favorite of the railroad's landmen. Killing him had stirred up more than local grief. It had rattled the men who drew lines on maps and called it progress. "You really think handing Levi over will cool them down?" Caleb asked quietly. "They'll hang him in the square at noon maybe, but they'll still come sniffing around you boys. They know who he rode with. Blood doesn't wash that easy." Silas' eyes narrowed. "This ain't about justice, Doc. This is about debt. That man he shot had cousins in the governor's office, and friends with badges. We give E.M. Levi. Maybe they forget the rest. You're bargaining with a storm, Caleb said. You don't get to tell it which shingles to take off your roof. Silas' patience frayed. His fingers dropped closer to his revolver. Move aside. Caleb stood his ground. His heart beat a fast, hard rhythm in his throat, and his shirt stuck to his spine. He'd spent years learning when to step in and when to step back. He knew what happened to men who got between a mob and its chosen sinner. Sometimes they got trampled. Sometimes they got sainted after death. He'd never had much taste for sainthood. No, he said simply. You want your brother, you come through me. You'll have to look him in the eye while he's on that pallet, and tell him you chose your own skin over his. Wade's jaw worked. His eyes darted to Silas, then to the door behind Caleb. Caleb saw, in that restless shifting gaze, the scared boy Wade had once been, chasing tumbleweeds and rattlers under the basin sun. Then Wade spat in the dust, and the boy vanished again. Silas, he said, we ain't got time for this. Sheriff will be here soon. Or those railroad bastards. Let's take him and go. It was Silas' choice. Caleb saw that, saw the way the night had narrowed to the space between Silas' long fingers and the revolver grip. He wondered, briefly, if there was any phrase in any language that could shift the weight of years and blood that had brought them all here. In the end, it wasn't anything Caleb said that changed the balance. It was the sound of horses in the distance, a different rhythm, tighter, held, and more disciplined than the Kincaid's ragged mounts. The faint clink of harness metal, the hollow echo of iron on packed road. A whistle blew once, low and sharp, from the direction of town. Silas' head snapped toward the sound. Porter, he muttered. Damn it all, Caleb heard it too, the sheriff's mare steady and sure, and another horse with a lighter, more precise step. The Pinkerton, no doubt. They were coming fast, not bothering to be quiet. Law didn't have to whisper when it rode in with the railroad at its back. Silas cursed under his breath and wheeled his horse. This ain't finished, Doc. He jerked his chin at Wade and Milo. In a flurry of hoofbeats, the Kincaids melted into the dark, angling away from the approaching riders toward the dry wash that led into the low arroyos. Dust rose in their wake, catching the moonlight like ghosts. Caleb watched them go, feeling the knot in his gut twist tighter. He'd kept Levi out of their hands, for now. But he'd only traded one sort of danger for another. Sheriff Porter would come through that door in minutes, Pinkerton in his shadow, and they'd have the law printed black on white behind them. You could argue with brothers. You could barely argue with ink. He barred the door again and limped back to the pallet. Levy's eyes were half closed, lashes beaded with sweat. They gone? The boy asked, voice a thread. For now. Caleb checked the bandage, fingers moving by habit. The wound still seeped, but slower. The fever burned steady under Lovey's skin. But Porter's comin'. And a railroad man with him. They got paper on you, son. Wanted posters, with your name spelled right, and every scar you got inked in. They aim to make a show. Levi swallowed with difficulty. You gonna let M.M. have me? Caleb looked at him. Really looked. Not at the blood on his chest, or the freckles at his nose, but at the flicker in his eyes, the thing that always separated men who could still be reached from those who'd already gone over the far edge. He saw the same haunted crease between Levy's brows he'd seen in soldiers, right before they woke screaming from surgery. The ones who carried faces with them when they closed their eyes. Caleb thought of another boy, years back in a tent that smelled of lie and fear. 17th, maybe, with corn-yellow hair and a letter from his mother folded in his pocket. They brought him in with half his leg torn away and begged Caleb to cut faster. Caleb had been tired, his hands shaking from whiskey and the weight of 20 other amputations that night. He'd slipped. The boy had bled out with Caleb's fingers inside his chest, clutching at a heart that had no more use for beating. He still saw that boy sometimes when the wind got high enough to sound like voices. He had let fear and exhaustion and the easy cruelty of war decide that boy's fate. He'd sworn, kneeling in the mud after, that he'd never again hand a breathing soul over to death just because it was simpler. "No," Caleb said. The word surprised him with its firmness. "I'm not." Hoofbeats stopped outside. The murmur of voices drifted through the boards. Sheriff Porter's gravelly drawl and a sharper tone Caleb didn't recognize. He grabbed his bag, his hat, and the old tan duster hanging from the wall. "You feel like walking?" he asked Levi. Levi frowned. "What? You heard me. I can hide you here for maybe 5 minutes before they start tearing the place apart. After that, all I got is lies and a pistol, and I'm short on bullets." Caleb tossed the boy a shirt. "We're leaving." Levi tried to sit up. Pain hit him like a hammer, and his face went white as unbaked clay. Caleb caught him before he toppled sideways, swore softly, and changed plans in mid-motion, the way he'd done 1,000 times when a wound bled more than expected. He dragged the pallet to the back corner where the chimney hole led out through the roof. The adobe there was rough and broken from a half-finished repair. 8 months ago, when he'd thought he'd be settled here for years, Caleb had knocked a section loose to widen the flue. He'd never gotten around to patching it fully. Now, he thanked whatever ragged angel watched over half-done work. "Help me," he told Levi. Between the two of them, grunting and cursing and swallowing pain, they levered the boy up and guided him toward the narrow gap. Outside, someone pounded on the door. "Rourke." "By order of the county, open up." Porter's voice, official and tired. "We got questions about a fugitive." Caleb ignored him. He boosted Levi's shoulders up through the opening, muscles screaming. The boy bit down on a groan so hard his jaw popped. "Shimmy along the roof," Caleb whispered. "Stay low. My wagon's behind the mesquite stand. You roll off the far side, I'll get you there." Levi sucked air through his teeth. "Why are you doing this?" "Because I once let death walk off with a boy who didn't deserve it," Caleb said. "I'm still paying for that. Maybe this puts a little weight on the other side of the scale." He shoved Levi the rest of the way up. Hands scraped on clay tiles as the boy crawled along the low, sloping roof. Dust sifted down onto the pallet in his wake. Caleb brushed his hands off, grabbed his pistol, and turned toward the door. He cleared his face of everything he was feeling. Put on the old mask, competent, cranky, tired. It fit like a glove. Then he tugged the bar free and swung the door open a crack. Sheriff Porter stood there, hat in one hand, the other resting on the butt of his weapon. He was barrel-chested and going soft at the middle, with eyes like a man who'd seen enough fools to know he was outnumbered. Beside him, much too clean for this country, was a man in a dark suit with a matching waistcoat, collar starched even in the heat. A narrow-brimmed bowler shaded his eyes, but Caleb could see the sharpness there, measuring, cataloging. "Evenin', Porter," Caleb said. "You bring the governor with you, Mr. Harlan?" Porter grunted, nodding at the man in the bowler. "Pinkerton. It corn. He's got business with you." "Business with Levi Kincaid," Harlan corrected. His voice carried the clipped precision of someone used to being obeyed. "We know he came here. Witnesses saw his brother's half, dragging him in this direction." "Blood trail stops at your door," Caleb shrugged. leaning on the frame. Lot of blood passes through this door. You'll have to be more specific. Harlan's gaze flicked past him, cataloging the shadows, the palette, the scattered instruments. Caleb saw his nose wrinkle slightly at the smell. Carbolic, sweat, and a hint of singed hair. You're harboring a fugitive from both county and federal warrants, Harlan said. That's obstruction, Doctor. You fought in the war. You should know better than to stand between a wanted man and the law. I fought in the war, Caleb said slowly, and I learned not to trust every paper some clerk signs 3 states away. I also learned if I start handing over half dead men to any badge that comes knocking, I'm not a doctor anymore. I'm just another bullet. Porter shifted, looking uncomfortable. Caleb, we ain't here to argue philosophy. They want Levi bad. The storekeep he shot. He had friends. Rich ones. Railroads breathing down my neck. I give Eam Levi. Maybe they ease up. You boys all think you can bargain with storms, Caleb muttered. Louder, he said, you're welcome to look around. Mind your boots. I just swept. He opened the door wider and stepped back, angling his body to block the view toward the back corner. Harlan moved past him like a cat, eyes everywhere at once. Porter followed, hat still in his hands, gaze lingering on the bullet scars in the walls and the broken lamp on the floor. Who have you been shooting at? He asked. Roaches, Caleb said. Big ones. Harlan ignored the joke. He crouched by the pallet, fingers brushing the dent where Levy's weight had been moments before. The sheets were still warm. He touched the bloody bandages in the basin, lifted them to his nose, and inhaled. Fresh, he said. You worked on him not half an hour ago. I work on lots of folk, Caleb replied. Kincaid boys, miners, girls from the Golden Star when their men get rough. I don't staple names to their bandages. Harlan's jaw tightened. He stood, moved to the chimney, and ran a gloved hand along the rough edge of the opening. Dust came away on his fingers. Caleb's heart thudded harder, but outwardly he only scratched at his beard. From the roof came the faintest scuff. Caleb prayed it sounded like wind to anyone who wasn't listening for it. Harlan's eyes narrowed, but he said nothing. For a moment, the room held its breath. Then Harlan turned back to Caleb. You know what happens if you're lying? He asked. The railroad doesn't forget. Men like the Kincaids are fleas. We brush them off. But you? He let his gaze travel slowly over the cramped, shabby room. You're a useful man, Dr. Rourke. You sew up our workers, patch our sheriffs. We like useful men. We dislike it when they make themselves otherwise. Caleb met his eyes. I know what happens when I forget why I picked up a scalpel in the first place, he said. That scares me more than you do. Harlan's lip curled slightly, as if he'd found a bad taste in his mouth. Porter, he said. Search the yard. Check his wagon, the stable, the mesquite stand. If the boy's here, we'll find him. Porter hesitated, then nodded and stepped outside, boots crunching on the hard-packed earth. Harlan lingered, gaze moving once more over the room, weighing possibilities. Caleb could almost see the calculations running behind his eyes. Angles, distances, the likelihood of a wounded man making it far on foot. Levi, Caleb knew, was by now sliding down the far side of the sloped roof, every movement tearing at his wound. Beyond the back wall, a short scramble through brittle brush would bring him to the low hollow where Caleb kept his wagon hitched. The mule knew the path by heart. If Levi could climb up, if his hands didn't slip on the worn boards, if the fever didn't steal his strength at the wrong second, so many ifs stacked like kindling. You hear that? Harlan asked suddenly. Caleb's spine prickled. Hear what? They both stood still. The night creaked around them, wind picking at the corners of the shack, a distant coyote yipping, Porter's muffled curses as he stumbled into something outside. The faint jingle of harness. No hoofbeats yet. No wagon wheels. Nothing, Harlan said finally. For your sake, I hope it stays that way. He moved to the door. At the threshold, he paused and looked back. You can still help yourself, Doctor. The Kincaids are done. They just don't know it yet. When this territory becomes more than a backwater, when there are proper courts and paved streets, men will remember who stood in the way of order. Order ain't the same thing as justice, Caleb said. And it sure as hell ain't the same thing as mercy. Harlan's eyes hardened. Mercy is a luxury for men who can afford it, he said. The railroad has schedules to keep. He stepped out into the night and was gone. Caleb let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. His shirt clung to him with cold sweat now. He barred the door again, then crossed to the back corner. He pressed his ear to the wall. Faintly, through the thickness of adobe and the beating of his own heart, he heard it. The soft creak of wagon springs, the low grunt of a mule shifting into motion. Then, a moment later, another sound cut through. Hooves, several horses at a gallop, coming not from town, but from the direction the Kincaids had gone. Caleb's gut dropped. He hobbled to the tiny back window and peeled aside the rag curtain. Out beyond the mesquite stand, the basin shone under the moon. He saw the shadow of his wagon moving, slow and jerky, wheels cutting pale scars in the dust. Levi must have made it up, must have loosed the brake and flicked the reins with a shaking hand. The mule plodded toward the low gap in the ridge where the old Arroyo Trail cut through the butcher's teeth heading west. From the south, 3 riders raced to intersect it. Silas, Wade, and Milo, silhouettes leaned low over their horses' necks. They'd circled around, hoping to slip past Porter and Harlan. Now they'd found something better than their brother docile on a pallet. They'd found him trying to escape. Caleb swore. He grabbed his bag, slung his rifle across his back, and snatched up the old duster. His knee protested every step, but he moved anyway, drawn by something heavier than pain. Mercy costs, he thought again. Sometimes you pay in blood. Sometimes you pay in miles. He slipped out the back, keeping to the shadow of the wall, and jogged crouched through the brittle brush. Porter shouted something from the front of the shack, but the wind stole the words. Harlan barked an order. A gun went off, but it wasn't aimed at him. Not yet. Caleb reached the small corral where his mare, a dun with more sense than speed, stood dozing. She rolled an eye at him as if to say she'd known it would come to this someday. He threw the saddle on bare-backed, cinched it by feel, and hauled himself up with a grunt that made his vision swim for a second. Go on, girl, he rasped, leaning low over her neck. We got fools to catch. He kicked her into a gallop, angling wide to avoid the bright shapes of Porter and Harlan near the shack. Shouts rose behind him, but no bullets bit the air around his ears. Maybe Porter recognized his silhouette. Maybe Harlan thought he was running, finally choosing the simple coward's road. Let them think what they liked. Caleb had one direction in his mind, the gap in the ridge where wagon and riders would meet. The basin rushed past under the mare's pounding hooves, sagebrush flashes, the silver ribbon of the dry wash, patches of moon-bleached grass. The night air tore tears from his eyes and flattened his shirt against his ribs. Each jolt sent a spear of pain through his knee, but he clung on, teeth clenched. Ahead, he saw it unfold like a stage scene in harsh moonlight. The wagon, swaying, mule laboring. Levi a hunched shadow on the bench, shoulders slick with sweat. From the south, the Kincaids closing in, horses fresher, their voices carrying faintly on the wind. Lee! Wade shouted, "You stop that damn wagon." Levi didn't stop. If he heard, he didn't show it. Maybe he knew stopping would be worse than any bullet. Caleb pulled his mare harder, angling to intersect between the Kincaids and the wagon. The gap through the ridge loomed ahead, a narrow throat of rock where the trail funneled between jagged walls. If Levi reached it first, he had a chance. The Kincaids would have to follow single. If the Kincaids reached it first, they'd box him in like a calf headed to slaughter. Dust choked the air. Caleb coughed, eyes watering. The mare's sides heaved under him. "Just a little farther," he muttered. "You quit on me now, I'll haunt you." The distance shrank. 100 yards. 50. 30. Caleb flattened himself and drove his heels in. The mare surged with a last ragged burst. He shot past the wagon's tail, catching a glimpse of Levy's pale, strained face. One of the boy's hands gripped the reins, the other pressed to his bandaged chest. Blood had seeped through again, black in the low light. "Don't stop," Caleb yelled as he passed. "Whatever you do, don't stop." Levis' eyes met his, wide and wild, then flicked past him to the shapes bearing down. Caleb turned his attention there too. Silas led, jaw clenched, eyes locked on the wagon. Wade flanked him, crouched low over his saddle horn, a grin like a broken bottle on his face despite the strain. Milo, less sure, trailed a length behind. They hadn't expected anyone else out here tonight. The surprise in Silas' gaze when he recognized Caleb would have been funny in another life. "Move aside, Doc," Silas bellowed. "Ain't your business." "That boy's my business until he can stand straight without bleeding," Caleb shouted back. He raised one hand, palm out, a useless gesture against men who measured right and wrong in acreage and pride. Silas' hand dropped toward his gun. "Last time I'm asking." Caleb knew he could squeeze the trigger first. Old reflexes fluttered awake in his muscles, remembered the quick, precise violence he'd made a living with in the years when he was trying to drown his guilt. He'd once been faster on the draw than any Kincaid. Maybe he still was. But shooting Silas here would mean blood spraying the dust, horses screaming, the wagon caught in the chaos. Levi might die in the crossfire, or he might live just long enough to hang at sunrise. Mercy costs. Justice too. Tonight, one of them was going to have to ride lighter. Caleb hauled on his reins instead of his pistol. He angled his mare directly into Silas' path. Horses avoided collisions by instinct. Silas' mount veered, stumbling. Silas swore and grabbed for the horn as his trajectory jogged sideways.